and we welcome you to Season 2, Episode 8 of Wilk and Wiss, your bi-weekly podcast featuring Utah athletes in the National Football League. This is our Week 3 recap. Cole, we're already 3 weeks in. You and I both surviving in
still know
guillotine
nothing
again.
at all.
Bizarre weekend again. What I thought was a weird week last week, I thought this week was actually weirder.
Yes.
In terms of some of these scores and what we're going to talk about. But, as I'm putting together this rundown that we do each week, a lot of injuries, man, that have piled up early. And I feel like in the past, it's a lot of Utah guys filling in for some of these injured people, but it's been the good players that have been hurt. It's been Jordan Love. It's been Puka Nacua. It's been Taron Johnson. I mean, those were guys that were heavily featured a year ago, and we still haven't been able to talk about them. So just kind of an interesting note as I was putting this together. I thought this is a really shallow week in terms of our and guys who did play didn't really play well. It's going to just being frank and honest about it.
We're missing our superstars that kind of keep the podcast trucking forward. But then, the guys that are left now, this, it sounds like you're saying what I was thinking right before jumping on is that picking an MVP of this week is thin pickings.
Very
to be
thin.
honest.
Very thin. It's not great. And that's just kind of the circumstances of it. You have bad weeks, and
the NFL cyclical will have better weeks going ahead, but just this was one of the weeks where everything came together in the bad way.
Yeah. And you're going to be having a lot of guys coming off of the PUP in a week or two, hopefully starting to get some guys off of IR eventually down the road. Hopefully Jordan Love plays this next week, which I kind of think is going to be the case. But anyway, let's get to Thursday Night Football last week. Giants, or the other New York team, the Jets, taking on the New England Patriots in a divisional matchup. And the Jets win 24-3. Kind of went like we thought. The Jets still don't look like unbeatable. They still look very beatable, but this is what we were expecting out of New England.
Yeah, the Jets defense being able to manhandle New England. This was the only predictable game of the whole slate. That one on Thursday, which Thursday is always the random day, but the one on Thursday this week was exactly what we thought should happen. And then as soon as Sunday morning starts, everything else goes to crap. And let's start with the very first one. It's in New York, or the other New York team. The Giants beat the Browns 21-15. The Browns are now 1-2, and their one win was fluky at that. Winston Reed, first time we've said that man's name, undrafted free agent from Weber State, had a tackle, and he was called up. He officially was part of roster cuts alongside on his Cleveland Browns teammate Siaki Ika, but a couple of them, because of all the injuries that you mentioned, sometimes we get some of these unheralded names cropping up, and Winston Reed was one of them.
I'm glad you found that. That's all credit to you. I didn't have that down. Very, very cool thing. It was a good weekend to be a guy who played football for Jay Hill. We'll leave it at that. Or even currently plays football for Jay Hill. How about Malik Neighbors, man? Boy, like Marvin Harrison's been good, but like Malik Neighbors has been on another level. And going into today, I had him as we were talking about it at work with a couple buddies. I had Neighbors as my offensive rookie of the year 3 weeks in. Now, given how tonight went, the answer to that may have changed. But needless to say, that's the Giants have a good piece there, Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, so I compare this, and I didn't want to say this out loud, and so I will never get credit for it, but I'm going to say it kind of now. That in the back of my head, this pick reminded me of the Detroit Lions leading up to Calvin Johnson, where they kept picking receivers, and they never worked out. And then it was always the same body type too, just the big dudes. And then they picked Calvin Johnson because that's what they did. And they happened to stumble on someone that was just a universal talent. And there were people at the time that thought that Calvin Johnson might bust just because he was going to the Lions and he looked like all the other guys that busted. But Calvin Johnson was different, and so he's a Hall of Famer. Malik Neighbors, years and years of the Giants picking these same undersized, in the NFL, you play them in the slot, but they're super fast and you can get them doing anything. Wandale and Jaylon Hyatt and whatever. Like, they're all just small, speedy guys. but eventually you keep picking the small, speedy guys, and when one is just an undeniable talent, it gets to work out.
Not even the Giants could screw that up. Yeah.
Yep.
The game our guest was at in Nashville, Packers win 30-14 over the Titans. Got a really cool picture from my brother. Was in the end zone on the Jair Alexander pick six. Took a selfie with the guys as they were celebrating, taking a joke selfie in the end zone, which was cool. It's just cool to see.
Yeah.
Uh, Chris Brooks did get 3 carries on 3 yards after getting signed this week to the active roster for Green Bay with some of their running back injuries. So and talk about a Malik Willis revenge game. He looked great. Now, granted, again, did Matt LaFleur design him to be Jordan Love in this scenario? No, but he got the football out to good athletes, to the Christian Watsons and to the Jaden Reeds on this team. And honestly, the Packer defense has probably been what's been most impressive stepping up in the absence of Jordan Love.
With the new coordinator, but also, so it wasn't the Packers runners. We have a running back that we talked about as a Utah connection, but Josh Jacobs wasn't having any success either. It was the Malik Willis designed run game that LaFleur came up with that allowed the Packers to move the ball at all on the ground, and they get the big win. Indy 21, Chicago 16. Tanner, I got our picks up next to me, and the two of us picked Chicago, and the guy that was insistent on not picking any of the NFC North ended up working out in this scenario. Julian Blackmon gets 7 tackles in the Indy secondary. Matt Gay 3 for 3 on extra points, and then Jaylon Johnson 2 tackles, had a pass deflection and a pick. And when he made that pick, part of things were going through my brain. I was thinking about how we get to talk about Jaylon Johnson. He's a top 5 corner. This year, he might be the best corner in the NFL. We already know that we get to talk about the best off-ball linebacker in the NFL. Number 1 with a bullet, undeniable Fred Warner. Jaylon Johnson's getting to that tier where on the guys that we talk about that have specific Utah connections, Jaylon Johnson's one of those guys.
Yeah, kind of came on late last year. Didn't have a great start to the year last year, and then something flipped for him, and he's been just phenomenal ever since. And honestly, I think still is a candidate for player of the week, given, like you said, our slim pickings. Even though Chicago lost the game, Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson both are still just figuring things out, respectively. Anthony Richardson is either insanely accurate with the football or insanely inaccurate. There's not a lot of in between right now. But the Colts get a win. Jonathan Taylor was dang good for Indy. And at the end of the day, it's about getting wins. So first win for the Colts.
And so it's about getting wins, and it's our best candidate so far for player of the week was on the losing team for Chicago.
This one's interesting. This matchup's interesting because it heavily features our guest on Thursday because he lives in Houston right now as he works for the Houston Astros, but he's a Minnesota Vikings fan, and Sam Darnold is unreal. 3-0 are the Minnesota Vikings. They beat the Texans 34-7. Dalton Schultz, the only Utah connection in this game to record a stat, 2 catches, 11 yards. Minnesota's defense was for real on Sunday.
Brian Flores. And before I read down to the bottom of our rundown that said who our guest was going to be, in my brain I was like, we got to get Habel on sooner rather than later so he can enjoy some of this Vikings high, because I'm still not sure how long it's going to last, but 3-0 is 3-0 right now in the NFL, and so let's freaking take advantage of it.
And it's a good 3-0. I mean, they've played phenomenal. Kevin O'Connell, man, is a phenomenal head coach.
Texans and the 49ers, this is not the 2020 Pittsburgh Steelers that get to 11-0 for no good reason. This is legit. Then we go down the most competitive and somehow low scoring among great offenses so far. It's one of the more confusing games of the week, but Philadelphia gets the win 15-12 over the previously unbeaten New Orleans Saints. Britton Covey had a catch for 11 yards, not exactly replicating his production that he had on Monday night last week. Jamal Williams had a reception that didn't go anywhere. Rashid Shaheed didn't get any catches, had a punt return that didn't go anywhere. Taysom Hill has kind of disappeared entirely from this offense. When you watch long chunks of the game, he's not getting targeted, but he's also not out there blocking as often as he used to be.
I don't think he's healthy 100%. I think that's a big part of it with Taysom. Yeah. The good news, because I think we mentioned last week he had to go to the hospital, which was a big bummer after the game. He's fine. But yeah, I think it's a limited snap count for him at this point.
Makes sense.
Bizarre game though. You're absolutely right. It ends up being Saquon Barkley's game at the end of the day. Uh, and then Chris Olave had a big game for New Orleans late. Offenses started to get going a little too late, but good win for Philly. New Orleans was
Yeah,
undefeated and had been putting up points.
my side project, Pennsylvania connections, specifically Penn State connections in the NFL, has Saquon Barkley as our MVP.
You know,
It's
I would think that would happen a lot. Although there's obviously a lot of good Penn State guys in the National Football League, right, historically. So Cole, your Steelers are 3
yeah.
and 0. That defense, even with before Justin Herbert got hurt, he didn't look right, but still the Steeler defense was the Steeler defense. They win 20-10. Jaylen Warren limited again, just 3 carries, 5 yards. Miles Killebrew did have a special teams tackle. Semi Fehoko had a 17-yard reception for the Chargers, and then Aloe Gilman was really good for LA as well, 6 tackles and a pass deflection.
And it's Taylor Heineke, not Easton Stick, that comes in for Justin Herbert after he goes down. Uh, Jaylen Warren has ceded a lot of his backfield action to even Cordell Patterson, who's coming out of the backfield a lot, which we knew he'd come over with Arthur Smith and do a little bit of it. But I think all those Jaylen Warren fantasy fanatics from last year that wanted him to get more carries than Najee, even, that stock has gone down. And it's just at some point, Jaylen Warren's stature doesn't fit what Arthur Smith, who
Yeah,
used to coach Derrick Henry, wants to do and idealizes in the running back position.
which is unfortunate uh, at the end of the day. So,
Because Warren is still extremely talented, and they're not even
yeah.
getting him in there as a counterpunch. It's just heavy, heavy, and it's not like the Steelers have been fantastically successful with their offense. They're 3-0, but it's a
It,
much more fake 3-0 than the Minnesota Vikings have going on right now. The Denver Broncos, talk about what's fake
oh,
and what's real. This looked for real against a team that was maybe a little bit of a faker 2-0 coming into it. The Broncos get a win over the Buccaneers 26-7. Cody Barton, 4 tackles, Joan Ellis, 2 tackles. And it was just the power and sorry, not power, but speed, bend, just lean guys coming off the edge for the Denver Broncos all day, making Baker's life just ruining it from start to finish. And Jonah Ellis was one of those guys.
yeah, you got to give Sean Payton a lot of credit. Their game plan on both sides of the ball was perfect for what Denver needed to do. Now the question is, can you do that a second week in a row? That's the big question, right? Can Bo Nix do
Can
that a
Bo
second
Nix
week in
do
a
that
row?
second? Yeah,
That's the question. Is Bo Nix going to be able to have it? Because Bo Nix was great. Like he was really good. He was an more than an above average quarterback in this game. He took care of the football, got rid of it quickly, but I think with better route running by his receivers and a better play in the trenches.
he had a connection with Cortland Sutton that can't be
Yeah,
denied. The problem is every single bust, the NFL is littered with guys from the first round that did have one good game that gave you encouragement
yeah,
and couldn't string them together. Zach Wilson, we've talked about for the past few years, has had games and had halves where he looks like the second overall pick that he was supposed to be. But looking at the season and the career on the whole, he was one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL last year. And so Bo Nix, yeah, this was a good one, but it came after two really, really bad ones. And so we'll see what the truth ends up being.
yeah. It's got to be you got to get consistent now, and that's what you got to hope if you're a Denver fan. So, well, you're grinning right now because you picked
What?
this.
What?
Because you picked this. The Carolina Panthers score
Yes, they
36
did.
points with Andy Dalton, hold the Raiders to really 15 because they got a bum Aiden O'Connell drive at the end of the game.
Yeah,
No Utah connections in this one other than Andy Dalton doing what he did to BYU in Utah when he was at TCU
that's
years
true.
ago. Years ago. Middle school
Andy
me
Dalton,
years ago.
2011 NFL draft, Andy Dalton. Same one
I
as
think
Cam
so.
Newton, who's out of the league, and Jake Locker, who's out of the league, and Blaine Gabbert, who's out of the league. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's
Yeah,
Andy Dalton, right?
I think so. Here's what's funny. Like Andy Dalton was doing this though as a freshman at TCU, like 2008. Me remembers him just trashing BYU. So there was a little PTSD involved in watching what he did to the Raiders. But man, bizarre,
Our
bizarre,
picks,
bizarre.
our picks for the week. Your brother had 6 correct. You had 7 correct. I had 8 correct. I'm gonna hang my entire hat on this specific game and the fact that
Yes.
Andy Dalton got the win because I picked that one right and the both of you picked the Raiders.
So there's something about going first in the pick'em because Brant's still in first place then.
It's
Uh,
true.
although our guest this week is the defending champ from last year, so that'll be interesting. But yeah,
Seattle gets the big win 24-3 over Miami. No Utah connections yet. Skylar Thomas, he got beat up and not sure if he's going to make it through. And so the fact that you elevated Tyler Huntley and went out and got him, we'll see. I mean, the Mike McDaniel offense, it can't be. It seems like it's one of the tougher to pick up after a couple weeks, and so I don't expect to see Tyler Huntley soon. But still,
he's got to
you
be
gotta get
better than Tim
something.
Boyle though, man. Come on,
Oh boy.
like it is bad. We're gonna have a Dolphin fan on later in the season, and I kind of want to wait for him. Just give him his space. Let him
See if
have
Tua can come back and
yes.
give them any hope
Well,
before we.
just see if they can get any hope at all, period. I think we'll still have him on, at some point, but man,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's tough to be. It's a good thing they got the U, the real U down there, because
Hey,
oof.
I wonder what Cam Ward's doing on Sundays. Maybe he can come run the Mike McDaniel offense.
Well, this potential guest has posted tank for Cam, which anyway. A wild finish to this game that got really interesting kind of out of nowhere. Baltimore ends up beating Dallas. They led the entire game. 28-25 is your final. Dallas with some late comebacks
It was
attempts
28-6 at one point. This was
in the
crazy.
fourth quarter. Kyle Van Noy, another candidate for player of the week, 2 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 TFLs, a pass deflection, and 2 quarterback hits. And Nick Vigil, longtime Utah State veteran, kind of in the shadows in Dallas, did get in and get a tackle.
Let's clean up this Kyle Van Noy stat line though before we go on because we read off the stats as the NFL gives them to us, and we've been doing this for years and years. But just for clarification, for some of our less football junkie fans to understand, when we say that he had 2 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles, 4 loss, and 2 quarterback hits, those 8 stats came on 2 events in
Yeah.
his life. When he got the 2 sacks, a sack counts as a tackle. A sack counts as a tackle for loss because it was a tackle in the backfield, unless it's not, like unless it's a sack for 0 yards. But 90% of sacks are tackles and tackles for loss and quarterback hits. Sometimes if a sack happens and the quarterback fumbles the ball, it doesn't officially get to be a quarterback hit. Also, there's all kinds of like funky nuance
Yeah.
in the way that
Yeah.
the NFL records defensive stats, especially. But for 95% of these things, when we list off this like laundry list of things, really what happened is Kyle Van Noy got 2 sacks and then he got up and got a pass deflection. And then the other things just also are on the stat
They
report
happened
at
at
the
the
end of the
same
game.
yeah, they happened at the same time because technically he did tackle him. Technically it was for a loss. It just
Yes.
happened to be the quarterback. So, yeah.
But yeah,
Right.
so all those things, KVN got into the backfield and yeah, he's definitely a candidate, but sometimes especially for defensive players, all of those can add up and seem like, "Oh man, he was all over the place." And really that specifically isn't as like impressive as it sounds at first. So, moving on to the next, gosh, the Rams.
The afternoon was wild, man. Like
Rams beat the 49ers, the all-time injury bowl here. Who's going to
the
come out
IR Bowl.
alive? 27-24. Fred Warner did his thing, 4 tackles and a pass breakup. Mitch Wishnowsky had a tackle, but also 2 punts, had 90 yards in net, and one went inside the 20. The Rams, without Puka, without anyone, and do it on the 49ers coming off that crazy Minnesota loss. And they're all of a sudden 1-2. And something that both of us were, trying to go out on the limb and talk about how this could be the downfall of the 49ers because there just were bad vibes throughout the offseason. And will they be able to carry things through? And, can they survive another huge Super Bowl letdown? And, we want to think that they'll have a little hangover, but we both still picked them to win their division. Apparently, we weren't bold enough.
That might have been the worst loss in Shanahan's career regular season as the
Again,
head
it
coach
comes
of the
to
San Francisco.
McVay, his boy.
Like And that was such a McVay win. That was such a Matthew Stafford win. Like you still have one good player in Kyron Williams, and then it's the Tutu Atwell show, right? It's these random guys on defense that Tre'Davious White is leading. Uh, it was a fun game to watch, just as a bystander, as someone who doesn't like the Niners. I got a lot of fantasy points from Jawan Jennings that helped me win this week, and Brock Purdy, and they still lost. I mean, so many injuries
Best
though
case
for both
scenario for Tanner.
sides. It really was. Since my other game in the afternoon didn't go great for me, but yeah, it was a wild afternoon.
Speaking of that other game,
Oh
segue.
yeah, Detroit beats Arizona 2013. What was also kind of a wonky game. Detroit didn't score in the second half. I don't get I don't get worked up about the Cardinals a whole lot. Okay,
Not
and
compared to BYU and all.
no,
Yes.
and given and I told a friend, given what BYU did to Kansas State on Saturday night, I would take that.
Nothing could bring you down.
I would take that 100 times over a Cardinal. If it meant the Cardinals lost 100 straight games, I would do it. That's how big of a BYU fan I am.
Yeah.
However, when Mac Wilson gets a pick six right before the 2 minute warning and the officials blow it dead after the play, nothing was blown dead while the play happened. You go back and watch, that ball is snapped at 2:01. The most I've been personally screwed by a call in the NFL in my fandom.
Mm-hmm.
I was so mad. No such thing as a good ref.
And you can't, and that's the kind of thing that
You
should
can't
be able
review
to
it.
be reviewable,
Yes.
and you don't. And speaking of review and the BYU game, fortunately, it didn't have to matter. But how did they spend that long watching to see if he gets into the end zone? And he didn't, and they still screw up that call
I tweet it every week at least once in basketball or
because it's
football.
relevant at least once every week.
What is the point of having review if you're still going to get it wrong? And,
Yeah.
and look at what we've got. The NFL now has what, that replay assist thing going on. We're using these kind of AI things in tennis at the Olympics and ping pong even. How are we not implementing this in football more? I'm not saying let it take over and do everything, but anyway,
Got to be better
I,
than what we have.
I was very frustrated, not necessarily with the outcome of the game. Like Arizona's defense was awesome. We did give Detroit credit. They took James Conner out of it. That's what's opened up things for Kyler Murray so well is Arizona's ran the football well. We didn't run the football well at all. And that really allowed them to hone in on guys. A lot of injuries for Arizona, too. That's the other thing I'm worried about going forward. Tim Patrick did have a catch for 8 yards for the Lions. And my boy Kyrus Tonga had 4 tackles before getting hurt, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a serious thing, but yeah, still have a lot of faith in Arizona this season. This by no means got me down, but boy, did that blown 2 minute warning call just blow it dead, man. If it's the 2 minute warning and you think it is, blow it dead. Why do you let the play happen? Let the crowd go crazy. It oh oh that was the most
Yeah.
upset I've been about an NFL call maybe in my entire life.
Yep.
Choice words were said. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that.
And then we go into prime time Sunday night football, the Chiefs and the Falcons, no strangers to primetime football already early in this year. Chiefs win 22-17. Tyler Algier had 7 carries for 31 yards. Caden Ellis, second Ellis in the
Yeah.
stat sheet that we get to talk about, 7 tackles and a quarterback hit. And then Clark Phillips, the third, a tackle, all on the Atlanta side of things. But Andy Reid, our Utah connection for Kansas City, gets the win.
Yeah, unfortunately, Kingsley Suamataia has been benched for now.
Came in as a 6th lineman on a couple of heavy formations. But
yeah. Didn't get the start, didn't play a ton, but he's got to learn. He didn't play well against Cincinnati, and that's how you. It's a lot different benching an offensive lineman for a couple of games than benching a quarterback for a couple of games. Very different scenario there. So still a lot of hope there for Kingsley that things will get figured out there. But
he was always a raw prospect to begin with. The fact that he won the starting job through the offseason was surprising to both of us. Now we're just back to where we assumed it would be, and that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. He's relatively young still. I mean, didn't serve an LDS mission
for
declared early. Still had some eligibility left, even minus the COVID. I think he still had 2 years left of eligibility with COVID. So I mean, Still a young guy. He's going to figure it out.
That's
But
like Cam Rising has 2 or 3 more years left of eligibility, right?
when Cam Rising committed to Texas, CJ Stroud was a junior in high school.
When Cam Rising committed to Texas, the current Texas quarterback was like 12 years old and up to Peyton Manning's belly button.
I did see that picture today of old Arch. Yeah. Kansas City getting favored. I mean, did we didn't we're talking about poor officiating in the Arizona game. Like, was anyone surprised that Kyle Pitts didn't get that call? Like, was anyone really surprised? Like, you look at the numbers of how many times Mahomes has been picked off and a flag's been thrown
So
versus Tom Brady.
I have thoughts about that. I think that I don't care about that stat so much.
Okay.
And that this might be a longer conversation, and just the idea of, defenders are more afraid of Patrick Mahomes, and so they feel like they have to do the pass interference. If you look at each individual pass interference, most of them look legitimate, but guess what? The wrong thing here is that most of them look legitimate that aren't being called for
On
the
the other
team that,
side.
yeah, where Patrick Mahomes isn't getting the throw. So yeah, Patrick Mahomes should get those calls because those are pass interference. But Kirk Cousins needs to get the call because that was also pass interference. And he
Yeah.
didn't.
It just wasn't surprising. Like, I knew Kansas City was going to hold on and win that game, like just the way it went. And what was that play call at the end? To run like a sweep type play to your running back who's only averaging 2 yards a carry versus Algier, who had a much more efficient game than Bijan, at least in the straight ahead run
If
game.
this was Arthur Smith still on the sideline with the history that he had of funky stuff, this would be headlining every fantasy football show the next morning. But because we, for some reason, have more faith in this Shanahan McVay tree guy that's running their offense now, no one talks about it.
Yeah, it was off. I mean, it was talked about in the water cooler where I worked today. By I,
Because
it
we're
was
Algier guys around
well,
here.
and I was approached by two separate people on two very separate conversations. What was Atlanta doing on that? And just the play call in general. Like, even if you're going to give it a Bijan, 4th and 1, man, why are you stringing it out like that?
Well, and earlier in the day, DeAndre Swift getting the call in the Chicago game
Oh,
where that's blown up immediately. Some of these coordinators are thinking too hard.
it's way too
And,
hard.
those plays very useful, but there's a time and a place. Then into Monday night, we're recording this on Monday night, so these games are pretty fresh. We talked about this last year. Quick take on 2 Monday night games that are basically going at the same time, Tanner. Do you
I
have
don't.
ability to watch both of them? Are you
Um, I could pull another TV out and do it like a March Madness style thing,
but
but and
for a
luckily
couple Mondays at the beginning of the season, is it worth it?
no.
Yeah.
And this fortunately one of these games was so boring that I just, as soon as the other one started, that was my focus for the rest of the
Yeah.
night because Buffalo, in my opinion, is the best team in the National Football League 3 weeks in. The
I'm
vibes are
not fighting
good.
it.
The quarterback play is good. The supporting cast is amazing. Buffalo beats Jacksonville 47-10. Dalton Kincaid, man, 3 catches, 41 yards and a score. Everyone was getting touchdowns for the Bills, but Dalton gets one. Certainly
I
a
could have used
candidate.
a little bit more from Dalton Kincaid in fantasy because
Mm,
I invested heavily in him during the fantasy football draft. And this game was just so out of hand that they didn't have to, and everyone was getting their success that it didn't have to be a Dalton Kincaid game, even though 47 points on the scoreboard made me hope that it was.
right, right. Uh, and then Cole Bishop did have a tackle for the Buffalo defense. Devin Lloyd, 4 tackles for Jacksonville. Got beat a couple times tonight. Wasn't the best game for Devin Lloyd or anyone that plays defense for the Jacksonville Jaguars for that
Yeah.
matter.
And then the competitive Monday Night Football game that was going on while Buffalo was cementing themselves as also preseason takes that have aged well for us because we don't talk about the ones that age poorly. People that thought Buffalo was going to go through some massive transition were underestimating McDermott and Josh Allen and the weapons that we knew were there and were going to be Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman's
Dude,
fit with what Josh Allen wants to do. The fact that they drafted Dalton Kincaid early last year so that they could have a plan in place for when this inevitably happens. We knew.
yeah,
We knew.
yeah. Uh, yeah, just Khalil Shakir, man. I mean, a Boise State guy, so on the border, but I saw him play twice in person down in Provo. Both times I thought, man, this guy just is he just has a nose for the football. At some point, I don't know if this stood throughout the game, but at some point tonight they were talking 25 consecutive completions. If Khalil Shakir was targeted, he made the catch
Yep.
25 consecutive times. Crazy.
All right. So now to the other Monday Night Football game.
Mm.
Washington wins over Cincinnati 38-33. Bobby Wagner had 8 tackles. Zach Moss, 12 carries, 58 yards, and a tutty. And then Jay Tufele, 2 tackles, had a half a sack and a quarterback hit on his stat line. And I said it in the last episode that I would promise to not pick Cincinnati in the month of September. And I said, oh no, of course they can beat Washington. Washington's one of the worst teams in the league. This Washington team can't do anything. Jaden Daniels hasn't shown anything other than the ability to run every now and then. Well,
Um, yeah, crickets, man. Holy cow. We might have a superstar on
and
our
the score
hands.
looks better than it was. Cincinnati scores with less than a minute and no real chance to do anything else with it.
First time since 1940, there is a game with 0 punts and 0 turnovers. Cincinnati missed a field goal. That was it. Other than that, there were points on every drive, other than, I guess, Washington kneeling out at the very end of the game. Talking about takes that have aged poorly, how down was I on Jaden Daniels?
I was right there with you.
Very down. He just completed 21 of 23 passes, highest ever for a rookie quarterback in a game, to have that many completions with that percentage. My jaw was to the floor. That touchdown to McLaurin late to seal it. Man,
Smarter football analysts than us are going to be talking about Lou Anarumo's defense because as of their Super Bowl appearance in 2021, people were talking about him being a head coaching candidate despite being just kind of old, uninteresting on the defensive side, but his defense was so good that maybe, and then it has just been going down, especially from last year into this year firmly. Jaden Daniels is looking good. I still don't. It's a Cliff Kingsbury offense. I still don't believe that Washington
sure.
is truly good despite a 2-1 record. I think this was more of a Cincinnati defense and Cincinnati as a team not being ready to play at the beginning of the year.
You know that there's a song I've listened to quite a bit since Saturday night, uh, by Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I think the Bengals probably should never listen to that song again.
Never
Uh,
remember any nights in September,
no.
let alone the 21st when BYU got an awesome win.
Sure, sure. And there's been some great music videos with that now, highlight
As there
videos with
should.
that song. But no, and Joe Burrow looked really good, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought Jamar Chase was elite. It was so nice for him to have T. Higgins back. But that defense, man, was just and it was make one good play, three bad ones in a row.
Yep.
Get a sack, force a penalty, three awful possession or three awful plays in a row from the defense. I mean, eh, yeah, it was one of the worst defensive performances we've seen so far this year, without question. Well, Cole, let's get to our MVPs of the week.
We're at that time.
Very slim pickings. Jaylon Johnson's on this list, given even though the Bears lost. You know how I value winning so much, but that's how slim we're at right now. Kyle Van Noy's got to be on there too. I mean, 2 sacks, and they came early, really set the tone for the Ravens defense to get ahead. The
And we
way
love a man who in his post-game comments is going to complain about refs. So that gives
agreed.
him a couple points as well.
Yeah, we like and had a pretty awesome tweet about BYU Saturday night as well. Was very happy about that. Dalton Kincaid's got to be on the list, man. I get that it
Yeah.
was an Oprah Winfrey type night for the Bills of you get a touchdown and you get a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid still was really good tonight. Anyone that was on that Bills offense was good tonight. I'm going to go with KVN. Maybe there's a little bias there where he is my all-time favorite collegiate athlete, period,
Anytime you
ever.
get a chance to do it, you do, and I love you for
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And especially on a week like this, I feel like it's appropriate to give KVN his flowers. So I'm going Kyle Van Noy.
I'm giving it to Dalton Kincaid as a representative of the Bills offense, which just is the best in the NFL right now. And so his star is going to continue to rise, and I think there will be weeks in the future where I'm going to give it to him, and he's going to have a much better stat line than tonight. But when you on Monday Night Football, with the game that started earlier and just immediately jump out to that early lead, and it's 47 points by the end of the night, Dalton Kincaid was a part of it, and it's gonna be Bills time for a lot of this season.
Yeah. Yeah. Bills fans are feeling really good. They were feeling good this morning before this game. Talked to both of our friends that are Bills fans. One was a guest this year on the show, one was a guest last year, and is likely going to be a guest later down the road. But speaking of guests down the road, we've got our good friend Jacob Habel, aka Great Value Jack Harlow. He is
He's
making a
coming
return.
back.
He is making a return this week to the show. He's been living in Houston, working for the Astros. He will be at the Texans game this week after also going to BYU Baylor on Saturday. So, but he's a Minnesota Vikings fan, worked for the Twins as well, has family ties to Minnesota. We like to tease him because he's a fan of a million teams, but he's really honed in on the Vikings. He's
Oh
really,
yeah.
it's all Vikings in the NFL. Tom Brady retired, left the Patriots. That made it a little bit easier. The Commanders have been awful up until tonight, so that's made it easy. And not that Minnesota, he just is honed in on Minnesota, so we got to give credit to our boy Habel, who
Also, we love him. He loves soccer and baseball more than the two of us. I've also on top of everything, and so NFL was always his fifth or sixth favorite thing, and yet he marched in here week two, technically, our first guest of last season, won the whole pick'em, and now that he's really focusing on the NFL, he's focused on the Vikings along to it, and so yeah, we love Jacob.
yeah, it was a wild week, Cole. We're excited to have see what's popping with Habel on Thursday. So good to catch up with you, my friend. Congrats to your Steelers being 3-0. I'm going to keep riding this BYU high from the
Yes.
wildest 7 minutes of game action I've ever seen in my entire life. And yeah, man, we'll catch up on Thursday and kind of see what this next week's got in store. Hopefully getting some guys back from injury too.
Absolutely. Jordan Love's got a shot at it.
Yeah.
But the NFL's more interesting and our show's a little bit more interesting when we got the superstars to talk about.
Appreciate you, my friend. We'll talk Thursday. He's Cole
See you then.
Wissinger. I'm Tanner Wilkinson. And we will also see you on Thursday. Thanks for tuning in to Wilk and Wiss, your bi-weekly updates on the National Football League and the players from Utah that are in it.